modular for intermodular in a modular case. What's going on here is we have the tape and microsound musical chain, which is acting as two things. One is an effects unit for the synth that is being used on the ZOIA, as we'll call it, as well as the drum track underneath. Then the zero control is being used as the steps user for the pitch and gate information on the ZOIA synth, as well as the drum hits, which are coming from the keyboards. So I was lucky enough to be able to be a beta tester. I've had this unit since December. Been spending time with it, been making patches, just trying to get as familiar with the device as possible. And obviously I have experience using the Zoya since it released back in 2019. So I'm pretty comfortable with the interface, pretty comfortable with the modules and the ideas behind this device. So I was very excited. I had the opportunity to test it, make sure that the bugs were squashed, create some factory patches that you will see and hopefully enjoy. I'll be doing more in-depth tutorials on those patches at some point. So official details are that the ZOIA is available for pre-order starting today, September 3rd. It will ship in about 2 weeks on the 17th from Empress as well as dealers. Pricing is $650 USD for the module, which includes obviously the module, a ribbon cable to plug into your Eurorack case, as well as an SD card, 16 gigabyte SD card, and a little adapter. Additionally, you can buy a standalone desktop case, which is what I'm using it in right now. It's its own power supply, and it runs on 9 to 12 volt, like a Boss style PSU. And the benefit there is it allows you to be more mobile with it, and allows it to be its own sort of hub, because I didn't have room in the tape and microsound. So it worked out for me. Other details, it has complete patch parity and processing parity with the Zoya. It's exactly the same specs, it's exactly the same code. There's been a large effort by the dev team to ensure that patches work on both platforms, which I was happy to test and debug as necessary. So all the patches that are available on Zoya today and forever will work on ZOIA, which is an amazing benefit considering there's almost, I think, 1,000 patches being shared on patch storage right now. You also get the effective presets made by myself and a couple other beta testers. Then really just free reign to create and explore your own designs. So some updates over the Zoya. Obviously, it's catered more towards the Eurorack format, so there are dedicated CV in and output modules on the bottom. We have 4 ins and 4 outs, which can be configured in any way that you would like. They have variable output voltages. You have 0 to 10, 0 to 5, and -5 to 5, as well as different input ranges. So if you're input or output ranges. So if you're sending a negative, a negative envelope, you can scale the output correctly. There's also a pitch transpose option. Because Zoya has its own pitch detection language and definition. So there's an easy way to switch between that and what a normal Eurorack format would expect, because I think their base is in C, so it's just making that quick conversion for you, so you don't have to do it. There's also MIDI in and out, It functions as a very flexible MIDI to CV and CV to MIDI converter. There is a dedicated headphone jack for TRS output with its own level control that is always available. Very useful for taking it on the go. Very useful as just as an output module, output effects module or output synth module. There's a dedicated input and output. There's 2 ins and 2 outs. The inputs feature a padding, same as the Zoya, -6 or -12, as well as no pad option. And then lastly, in terms of differences, there is the 2 dedicated push buttons on the left, which give you a little more flexibility in designing patches. So for instance, on a lot of my factory presets, I used one of the push buttons as like a tap tempo or as like a mode selector for some of the patches. It's just a useful extra tool for your sort of control scheme. Other than that, it's exactly the same as Zoya. There's also a couple updates coming today that merge the code. So we actually add a couple new modules starting today called the device control, which allow you to toggle the on Zoya it would be considered the spawn switch functions, but on Zibo it could be the bypass or the performance mode, which is very useful. It allows you to sort of automatically start up the unit with those things active, which is handy. You can also assign them to VCCs. That's for Zoya, some of the spawn switch functions, but it applies here as well. A nice feature that I don't think necessarily will get mentioned, but I think it's just cool to talk about, is there's actually a patch bypass on this, right? Since it's all DSP, you can actually completely bypass the audio routing and keep the CV running as is. If there are things that depend on like envelopes or audio to CV envelopes, that will stop running because the inputs have been bypassed, or the input is completely off in that case, but otherwise the CV will run normally. And you do that by hitting Shift and one of the input or output modules, or the device control option, which I thought was really clever because you don't see the idea of bypass in Eurorack very often. So it's a nice, handy, possibly performance tool if you like using a patch, but you don't want to turn down the volume control or the blend control. You can just immediately mute it and just have it just bypass through as normal. So that's a little handy thing. In terms of patching this, it's exactly the same as the Zoya. You have this 8x5 grid plus the outer peripherals for creating patches and creating things. So here I have what I call not another Rings Cloud clone, or NARC for short, which is a bandpass pinged filter synth plus some loopers and reverb that gives that Rings into Cloud's classic topology. Thought it'd be a cool factory patch to include. So we have that running with a QPass bass drum synth in the background. Just creates a nice little ambience. And the previous patch that I was showing is called the dual Zoya Oscillator, which is an FM 2-operator synth that features variable wave options as well as some pitch quantization. And it has FM inputs, so if you plug something into the input 1 or 2, that will affect the FM ratio between the oscillators as well as influencing the FM directly. There's also interconnected FM just as is. You can dial that in to taste, which I thought was a pretty useful tool. Just a cool patch. Again, I'll go over them a little bit in detail as the weeks go by. So I'll talk a little bit about the interconnectivity here. So like I said, we've got the Rings Cloud thing synth, and we're running it through the Mimeophone for some delay and some modulation, and then into the morphogene for this. I'm using the time lag accumulation function so that morphogene is running as a granular processor to pitch up or reverse the audio coming out of the synthesizer, the ZOIA synth. Again, the ZOIA synth is being controlled pitch and gate by the zero control, and then that's going into the first two CV inputs. And then there's some CV outputs that will vary depending on the patch, but they may include things like the envelope from the gate input, or the modulation output, like the waveform, or the envelope output from an input audio source. I tried to make them as varied as possible. And then, like I said, usually I put a tap tempo on the external push buttons or a mode selection option. For the drums, we have it's a combination of tempi, maths, and wogglebug, and QPOS being the pinged filter. So we have actually two pinged filters going on in this patch. So it's getting a gate and pitch, quote unquote, signal from the zero control, the same one that's going into ZOIA, and then going through the maths channels to both trigger the QPOS as well as change its filter value using the bandpass filter. And then there's some self FM coming from the smile pass filters to give it a little bit more grit. And then the wogglebug is being used for ring mod on the sound. We just, it's going to amplify the sort of grunginess of the bass. And the tempo is used for clock control, just an overall clock tempo for the zero control, and then that's driving everything else. And then obviously EXO, in this case, is being my output mixer between the morphogene output of the ZOIA synth and the QPOS output of the bass and drum hits. So I think this is a pretty interesting patch. There's a lot of stuff sort of going on. But yeah, ZOIA is officially out. Please let me know if you have any questions. Like I said, I'll be exploring more of this synthesizer, of how to patch it going in the future. I just want to say thanks.